thank you for joining us for the second of our alumni webinar series, Alumni Journeys, Creativity, Careers and Community. Just for a really quick bit of context, I'm Jo War, this is Adam Smith, despite what the caption on our screen will tell you. We're just sharing a screen this afternoon. We're both senior lecturers in English literature at York St John University, where we also co-direct the York Research Unit for the study of satire.
And together, we co-host the ongoing monthly podcast, Smith and Wall Talk About Satire, which has literally hundreds of listeners.
Yeah, and that's not a plug, it's just to give some rationale for us being here. That's why we're on your screen. It's because we're interested ourselves in comedy and satire. And for that reason also, we are delighted to have been asked to host this webinar as part of that series.
Before we introduce today's speaker, there's a few key housekeeping tips. So one, we'll be hosting a Q&A at the end of the session. So for participants, can you please use the Q&A section to submit any questions during the talk, and we'll do our best to cover as many as we can at the end. The Q&A panel is different from the chat panel. The chat panel won't work, so make sure you write those into the Q&A panel. It won't work because we've turned it off. It's not broken, but yeah, put them in the Q&A panel. There's also an auto transcript during the talk for increased accessibility. However, please be aware it does not always translate perfectly.
Yes, and onto the more interesting stuff. Our guest today is none other than Alistair Beckett King. Many of you may know Alistair from his appearances on the BBC panel show Mock the Week, or from his wildly popular YouTube shorts, which provided the world with a much needed source of levity during the particularly dark days of the first year of the COVID pandemic.
And indeed, beyond that. The restrictions have ended, but Alistair's channel keeps banging out the hits. You may recognise him from such insanely viral videos as Every Single Scandinavian Drama Ever, The Greatest Detective of My Generation, and my personal favourite, The Little Man Who Lives in the Crisps.
Known as the interdimensional ABK, Alistair is renowned for his unique combination of surreal, idiosyncratic humour, his fine eye for observational comedy, and his extraordinary VX abilities.
And as that list suggests, Alistair is a fantastic comedian and also a talented filmmaker and animator. He's been awarded the Leicester Mercury Comic Comedian of the Year in 2017 and the Natties, the new Act of the Year 2014. Just to be clear, that's NETYS. He's appeared on BBC Radio 4 Extra, has performed stand-up at Glastonbury, the Edinburgh Fringe, and several international comedy festivals. And like all the best people, he co-hosts a celebrated podcast, The Lawmen, in which he, alongside co-host Jamie Shakeshaft and guest comedians, investigate funny folklore, local legends, and obscure curiosities from the days of yore.
But before he did all of that, Alistair was a student here at York St John University, where he took a degree in theatre, film, and TV.
Alistair graduated from York St John University in 2005 before studying at the London Film School, where he won a Student Royal Television Society Award, and in 2013 was nominated for a Student Oscar.
And after all of that, it is at last our very great pleasure to hand over to the man himself, Alistair Beckett King.
Hello, thank you. It's me, Alistair, very popular with the Nazis, apparently. Not an intro I was expecting. Well, I'm going to assume that I'm on screen and you can see me now. I can only see myself, so let's assume you can see the same thing. Hi. I don't know if Zoom dropped out there, but what I heard was you might know him from his mildly popular YouTube videos. I think you might have said wildly, but I think mildly popular would be more accurate. I hope you've seen some of my videos. If you haven't, then that's fine. Most people in history, you belong to the group of the largest group in history, have not seen my videos. I am a stand-up comedian, and I would describe myself as an accidental YouTuber. And if you'll excuse me, I'm going to slightly read from my notes because I'm very used to speaking to people uninterrupted for 20 minutes because I do that in my job as a comedian. But the context is quite different, so I'm a little bit nervous, so please forgive me. This is going to be the somewhat rambling story of how I came to be an accidental YouTuber and why I would encourage you to try performing live comedy, brackets, if you want, close brackets. So, as Adam and Joe referenced, last year I got to tell some jokes on the television for the first time in my life, possibly for the last time in my life. So this might be the zenith of my career. It might be all downhill from here. And I don't know, if you're students now, you might be 20. I don't know if 20-year-olds still watch TV, but I need you to understand that it was a really big deal when I was your age. So I was quite excited about that. I ended up doing comedy because I basically tried doing absolutely everything else I was interested in first. And the reason for that is that I was scared of not being funny and also scared of not being taken seriously, which I think is a very bad starting point for creative work. So I went to York St. John 20 years ago, I think. Yeah, 20 years ago. So I feel myself crumbling into dust as I say that. I studied a BA. It was theatre, film and television in those days. That's the course that became, I think now, film and television production, because they dropped the theatre bit because theatre is boring, which was a great decision. And after graduating, I actually worked on that course, showing students how to use the video editing software Avid, which is a very interesting experience because I didn't know how to use the video editing software Avid. We never had Avid editing suites when I was a student there. They got them in and I started working, showing people how to use them. So what I did was, the week before the semester started, I started learning to use Avid. And then in the first week of semester, I told people things I'd learned the week before. And then in the second week of the semester, I told people things I'd learned in week one. And I did that for the entire semester. So by the end of the semester, I knew how to edit using Avid. And the students also did. And nobody knew that I had been faking for the entire semester. And that sort of seat of your pants learning it is part of appears again and again, I think, in the way that I've approached things. I did a lot of the early freelance work I did came through an initiative called City SJ, which was set up by our very own Andy Platt, where I would make sort of corporate videos through the university after graduation in about 2006 and 7. And that was my introduction to freelancing. And I've been self-employed ever since. And someone who shall remain nameless, because what I'm about to say next is a crime, someone who still works for the university gave me a pirate copy of Adobe After Effects 6, which obviously I can't endorse, but it had a significant impact on the way things developed for me, because sort of through that, I began to teach myself how to do animation and visual effects, and that had a big impact on the work I was doing at the time, but also the work I've continued to do. I should say, for the record, I do now have a properly licensed copy of the Adobe Creative Suite, so I am no criminal. That's fine, right? Good. And at the same time as I was doing this, York St. John helped me to make my own short films, which were not bad, but at the same time, not good. And that's all I really want to say about it. In 2009, I started an MA at the London Film School, which is officially one of Europe's most prestigious film schools, but they have no marketing budget, so nobody has ever heard of them. But you'll just have to take my word for it that technically it is prestigious. And I was able to do that thanks to a skill set bursary, because I don't know if this is still possible. Back then, you could get the government to give you money to learn things. I don't know if that still happens, but it was a pretty sweet deal. And at the same time, I continued to write and sometimes make short films, which were getting better, but were still not good. I also wrote a couple of indie video games, because my motto was always, why be unsuccessful in only one medium? Why not spread yourself thin across a range of, across basically everything you're interested in? Looking back, I think I was obviously somewhat talented, but I don't think it was clear what I was talented at necessarily. And then about 10 years ago, I went to an open mic comedy show for the first time. And I don't mean to imply that I was naturally brilliant at comedy and was instantly knocked my mic there. Very unprofessional. I wasn't instantly hailed as being like the comedy messiah, and the fact that it took me a decade before anyone allowed me to tell a joke on television should underline the fact that my meteoric rise has been very, very gradual. It's meteoric, like that one of those meteors that just narrowly misses the Earth every 20 years. Very, very slow. But I'm going to assume that some of the people watching this now or in the future might be interested in writing and performing comedy. Obviously, you don't need a degree to be a stand-up comedian. The entry requirements for comedy are remarkably low. And at the same time, it's a very difficult industry to break into. There's a sort of weird irony in that. But if you want to start, the barriers couldn't be lower. All you have to do is write 5 minutes of jokes, go to an open mic, and then do it. And these days, you could probably even find an open mic on Zoom and do it there. Yes, you could film a skit on your phone and you could put it on social media where probably no one will see it. But if you keep doing that and you get better at it and you get lucky, who knows? But I am going to encourage you to try live comedy if you're interested in comedy. I did a quick check among friends who are based in Yorkshire, and I think there are some decent, some nice gigs there run by interesting people. I heard good things about No Money in the Bank, which is a gig based in Leeds that apparently is supportive of newer acts. And on Facebook, there is the Yorkshire Comedy Industry Forum, and there's a female non-binary comedy forum, which I am told are quite supportive. So look into these places, find a place where you can actually go and see people in real life, if that's possible. If you are thinking of writing anything funny, I exhort you, I implore you to try performing it in front of a live audience. I know this is easier for some people than others, but back when I was making short films, I was trying to blend live action and animation and folklore and science fiction. I was trying to deliver fantastical visions directly from my brain into the minds of the viewer. And honestly, and I say this with some embarrassment, I never really thought about trying to entertain an audience. I had been making short films that were too odd to be mainstream, too undramatic to be mainstream, and simultaneously not po-faced enough to get into serious art festivals. What was missing, in retrospect, is obvious. What was missing was jokes, as well as good dramatic writing and good character-based writing. But had there been jokes there, I think my films would have worked better. And that's the nice thing about doing stand-up for me, because whatever your style of comedy, whatever your sense of humor, if you can make people laugh, it will be instantly recognized as being stand-up comedy. Whereas when I'd been making live action films, people were saying, maybe this should be an animation, maybe this should be something else. If you can say something and people laugh, it's stand-up comedy. It's a very, very cheap medium to be unsuccessful in. Like, I used to spend 9 months, a year, painstakingly putting together a short film full of visual effects and animation and all of that sort of thing, and then only at the end of that process find out that people didn't like it. As a comedian, I could go to a gig tonight and with write 5 new minutes on the train, and then I would find out beat by beat if any of it works, which if I wrote it on the train, probably none of it would, but I would get immediate feedback. If what I'm saying is boring the arse off of you, then what I'm about to say is going to be ironic. But stand-up is great because you get a good feeling for an audience's patience. You can tell when people are listening. You can tell when they're bored. You can tell when they're distracted. You can tell when people are expecting something that you don't deliver, when you fail to pay something off. You start to learn about what might be narrative or dramatic or even musical structures from the feedback the audience give you. Now, you might have heard that there is a free speech crisis in the world of comedy. I've certainly read that there is a free speech crisis on university campuses, so snap. Apparently, conservatives are self-censoring because they don't feel that they can speak freely, which is weird because in my experience, they never shut the fuck up for a single second. And it's nonsense. It's because there is no such thing as free speech in comedy. Yes, you can say pretty much anything you want, but you have to try and make people laugh it's not therapy. It's not your dream journal. It's a craft where you try to make people laugh. And here's the thing that I find extremely embarrassing. When I was your age, assuming you are a student now, when I was 20, irony was in. The Office had been so successful that we decided that all comedy had to be like that forever. And everyone wanted to do ironic racism, which is where you hilariously satirize racism by being racist, but not meaning it. Oh, so clever. Some comedians are still doing that. And we didn't really have social media then. And I'm glad there are no records of me trying to be funny in 2002, because I'm sure I would be embarrassed by that. I have excruciating memories of telling what I thought was an edgy, ironic joke and no one laughing. And in a weird, perverse way, I treasure those memories because I fear that the internet gives you a platform that's so broad that you can be an edgy shitposter and build up an audience of, let's be honest, neo-Nazis without ever experiencing the withering social consequences of a joke dying in front of your peers. This might be a uniquely middle-class white guy problem, but I'm telling you it because middle-class white guys have a tendency to make their problems other people's problems. Now, the Daily Mail would have you believe that comedians go out night after night and say, "Oh, the bloody Tories! Oh, down with Thatcher!" And then people applaud rapturously and they get paid millions of pounds. And that's nonsense. Obviously, that's not what happens at comedy clubs. But on the other hand, I've spoken to people who are afraid to go and watch gigs because they think that comedy clubs are going to be 1970s macho environments dripping with sweat and lager, full of misogyny and homophobia. And the reality is that comedy clubs in the UK reflect the values of the people who go to those clubs. So you probably won't see, I'd be shocked if you saw overt anti-black racism or sexism, homophobia, because the average audience is not comfortable laughing about that anymore. If I can give you an example, people have said to me, emailed me angrily to say, "Oh, you made this joke about Christianity. You wouldn't say the same thing about Islam, would you?" And the answer is no, because people wouldn't laugh if I did. Because I didn't grow up surrounded by Islamic culture. If I make a joke at the expense of my mum, that's funny. If you make a joke at the expense of my mum, that's weirdly aggressive because you don't know her. The dynamic is different. If you make that joke, no one will laugh. If you go to a comedy club this weekend, you might see people getting laughs for lazy classist jokes, for transphobia, for jokes about travelers, because that's who we are as a nation. But I don't think that it has to be like that, and I don't think that that is necessarily mainstream. I would suggest that you should go to comedy clubs and be the person who laughs at the clever and the silly, even the kind jokes. Go to an open mic and be the person who tells jokes, who themselves isn't necessarily a middle-class white guy who can't stand his wife. Obviously, this advice doesn't apply to conservatives. If you aspire to being a conservative comedian, you should just start a podcast right now complaining about being silenced by the wokes. It is an amazing substitute for writing jokes. People are afraid to do stand-up, though. People are afraid of, I think, one thing, which is dying on stage. And it is horrible, but it's nothing like the experience I described a moment ago. It's nothing like a joke falling flat in front of your friends. When you die on stage, it's a form of public humiliation. Your body instinctively overreacts. Your body goes, "Oh, I've been humiliated in front of the town elders. I'm going to be cast out onto the hills. Now I'll never find a mate." But once you've done it a couple of times, there's something liberating about dying on stage, because you can die on stage at a comedy club and then never see anyone in that audience ever again for the rest of your life. It's part of the process. And I didn't believe this when I started, but it happens to everyone. So like the comedians who you really admire have died on stage. And I used to believe that good comedians never ever died. That's what being a good comedian was. And that's not true. Dying on stage is part of the process. Comedians tend, I admit, to be quite needy people. Now, if you don't like my jokes, I can live with that. I'm not happy about it, but I can live with it because I've made enough people laugh now that I know I can do it. I want to get better. I don't think I'm the best. I want to be funnier. I want to be more original, but I know that I can do it. Dying is horrible, but I think your creative decisions should never be driven by fear. You should be cautious, be circumspect. Female comics, for instance, have to deal with a whole set of threats that I rarely even consider, like whose car you're getting into on the way to a gig. Manage your risks. Don't invest thousands of pounds in Edinburgh Fringe shows before you've done your first open mic gig. Some people do that. But if you can forget about fear, forget about it. And I have no idea how you actually do that, but I think it sounds like good advice. So, after nearly 10 years of plugging away on the comedy circuit, I had a stroke of luck. Although it didn't seem like a stroke of luck at the time, it seemed like a global pandemic. We all locked down and everyone was stuck in front of their screens. And honestly, many of the comedians I know had a really hard time. A lot of people thought about quitting. Some people did quit. It took a real toll on people's mental health. And I still feel a degree of survivor's guilt about this, because the skills that I had started developing at York St. John 20 years ago were all still with me in my back pocket. And in January 2020, as I think Adam referenced, I made a 40-second video spoofing Nordic noir dramas. And someone who I don't know stole it from my Twitter and put it on Reddit, and it went to the front page of Reddit. I didn't know what that meant at the time. It's a moderately big deal, at least for that day. And in a week, I went from having 600 YouTube subscribers to having 40,000 YouTube subscribers. Now, I'm not saying that to show off, but to emphasize how random a break, even as small as that, can be. I don't know who that person is that stole my video. I'm very grateful to them, but they could very easily have not done that. And none of what followed would have happened. I now have about 240,000 YouTube subscribers, which is small by YouTube standards. That's not a big deal. You don't make lots of money releasing 1-minute videos to an audience that size every few weeks. I warn you. But it was a big deal for me because I went from having virtually no audience to having a small audience that were waiting to see what I was going to do next. It's not a big following by influencer standards, but it's a decent following by the standards of comedians on my level. And it led to me writing a children's book at the moment, which is going to come out next year, and having a sitcom treatment optioned by a production company, which should come out never, because nobody makes sitcoms anymore in this country. But you got to try these things. So to sum up, I've no idea how long I've been talking for. I could have taken the experience I'd gained at York St. John, the connections I'd made and the skills I had developed, and I could have gone straight to London and got a job as a runner in a post-production house. I honestly think I would be the head of a department by now, and because I'm quite good at that sort of thing, and I would have earned a lot more money over the last 15 years, and I could have a pension. So that's probably what you should do if you're a student now. But my friends who did that got burned out and have quit the industry. Instead, since 2006, I have mostly done work that I was interested in. And it seems like a small thing to say, but I think that makes me very lucky. I have most of the work I have done to pay rent and put food on the table has been stuff that I wanted to do. You know, when making corporate videos started to get too easy, when I got bored with that, I stopped doing it and I went back to film school. And I can't say any of this is a sensible career plan. I can't just sit here and advise you to only do things that you're interested in. Can I? I think that might be my advice. It's very hard to learn lessons from other people's careers. Successful people tend to have had the right parents or gone to kindergarten with someone who's now very important at the BBC. You can't imitate that. You don't have control over those things. The only imitable feature of the people you admire in whatever creative field you want to work in is that they never stopped making stuff. They kept doing it. You can't change the other stuff, but that's what you can have common in. That's what you can have in common with them. So I did all sorts of things. I chopped and changed. I did what I felt like at the time. I'm not the visionary film director that I thought I wanted to be when I was 20, but I am doing the job I dreamed about when I was 11. I do stand-up comedy and I do animation. A lot less successfully than I thought I would, but I'm still doing it. So that's the end of my talk. I'll let Adam and Joe come back.
Hello there.
Hello.
We're not sure whether to start with an apology for implying you were a Nazi or for implying that you were mild. So we're sorry for being mildly inappropriate there.
If you're going to be a Nazi, at least be a mild Nazi. That's what
Yeah,
I always
exactly.
say. It's the extremists who ruin it for everyone on the Nazi front.
Just got to temper it a bit, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been a mild ride. Wild ride. But,
Thank you so much. That was fascinating.
So,
and,
ahead. Thank you. First question then, what lessons could people copy from your career? No, I'm just kidding. No, our first question for real is, do you have a favourite memory of York St John University apart from pirating software?
Well, I'll be honest. I put the software piracy in. And apropos of nothing, I want to say a big thank you to Rob Edgar, who was here just before we started. Great guy. But whoever it was that gave me some pirate software really did help me out there. And I'll be honest, I didn't enjoy school very much. I didn't think that I liked education until I came to York St John. And the thing I enjoyed most was working on my dissertation. Weirdly, I really enjoyed all of the projects we worked on, but what I realized I liked only doing things that I was interested in. And I realized that if you're careful in your choice when you're at university, you can do that. You can, if you're doing a film course like I was, you can approach it maybe even slightly cynically, saying, okay, well, this is a space in which I can learn skills and work on things that I'm interested in. And I think I did that. And the dissertation was, okay, well, I can write about anything. So I wrote quite a long essay about folk tales in cinema, because I'm interested in that. And that does feed into the podcast that you mentioned earlier. For me, it was the freedom to just focus on my interests that made me realize, oh wow, not only I'd always been fairly clever and moderately good at exams, but I'd never particularly, I'd always been near the top of the class, but I'd never been top of the class. I'd never been that committed because I didn't enjoy much stuff in school. And being able to say, okay, I'm only doing the stuff that really excites me now, that is what I took away from it in academic terms.
Amazing. And just go on.
No, you go ahead.
So just a follow-up question on that theme is, did you have a favourite room on campus, a favourite classroom or lecture room or space that our students might recognise?
And we could rename in your honour.
I love being in. I get very excited whenever I'm in a studio. I love the studio because they're spaces that are full of potential. You can build a set in there. You move it around. They change. They're just black boxes where anything can happen. I love standing behind flats where the stage weights are, where they're just pieces of MDF with things scribbled on them and call sheets stuck on them. I love all that sort of thing. The sort of ersatz reality that only works from the camera's perspective, the element of magic and optical illusion delights me.
Good answer. I was just thinking when you were talking about how doing the dissertation was a really exciting experience for you, and something about that, just, working on your own, finding what you're interested in, pursuing that in a fairly sort of single-minded and focused way, that maybe this is a bit too clunky, but in the same way lots of stand-up is necessarily solitary, right? It's yes. You on your own, you're literally standing up there, and also when you're making and producing the videos, that's there's that kind of solitary focus. But you're also a co-host on a podcast which is a different kettle of fish. So what's it been like doing Lawmen, and how does the collaboration on that work?
You're right, and I'm not sure I did focus sufficiently on collaboration in what I was in what I just said. I was aware that I'd sort of left that behind because obviously I met people at university who I'm still in touch with and who I've continued to work with. And I've done bits of animation for their films, and I continue to collaborate with old friends as well as working with comedians. But you're right that perhaps purely due to personality problems, I think I can be a little. I'm certainly better to work, a little bit of a Nazi, a mild Nazi. I do tend to be quite focused and quite focused on my own thing, I should say. And I'm not the kind of person who would leap straight into an improv troupe of 6 people and start messing around. I'd prefer to sort of sit and scribble into my notebook. And the good thing about the podcast is that James Shakeshaft can be the driving force, as he often is, behind things. So he can make me. I really love doing it. But it was James's concept, and he brought it to me, and we worked on it together. But also he can be like, okay, we want to do this. We've got this strategic plan for, we're going to get more listeners by doing this, or we're going to do this little outreach. That should be a fun crossover. And I get carried along by his enthusiasm. So it's been a wonderful experience, and we've no plans to stop making them. And that we started doing them weekly. Or almost weekly during lockdown, and that repaid itself quite well. We picked up quite a lot of listeners by doing that, because everyone was so starved for something. Yeah. And while we went nearly a little bit loopy doing it, as you may well have doing your podcast during lockdown, it's been a really good experience to have a friend who you can check in with. And actually, I think comedians are solitary, but and that's one of the reasons why people started to lose it during lockdown, is that you realize that the circuit is people's social life to some extent, which is, people have families, of course, and friends, they should, but, seeing people and getting feedback from comedians is something that we do count on as well. It isn't, I know I focused on audience feedback quite a lot while I was talking, but that matters. The laugh where there's nothing from the audience but a laugh from the comics at the back is a very interesting, bittersweet reaction. Because you're like, okay, so that is a good joke because all of the comedy experts laughed, but I can't use it. None of the people who need to pay for this laughed.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah, we've got thank you. We've got a question from an audience member which I'll read out loud, and just to remind people, there's still time for you to pop a question in the Q&A box if you would like to. So this question asks, what's your process for coming up with new ideas for your short videos? Do you self-consciously select a particular trope or a medium like Scandi Noir, 90s video games that you want to subvert, or is it less systemic than that? The questioner acknowledges this is a horrible question because essentially I'm asking you how creativity works, but you seem to consistently come up with really funny stuff, and I'd be fascinated to hear some reflections on how you do that and or what skills that has involved developing.
So where do I get my ideas from, you say?
Yeah.
The question, it's a good question, but the questioner is also right that it's one of those really hard ones to answer. It's very haphazard. I use the word random, which is a very sloppy word to use in my talk, but randomness is a big part of it. The Scandi Noir video, which is such a small thing, it's a 40-second video, but in a weird way, it changed my life, which seems like a weird thing to say, but it did, because there are several. I can't say for certain that I wouldn't have got on telly if I hadn't made that video, but I have a strong inkling that I wouldn't have got to do Mock the Week if I hadn't made that video. I'll never know, but I think that's the case. At the end of the Edinburgh Fringe 2019, I lost my voice within an hour of doing the final show of that run, and I couldn't speak for a week. And exactly 1 week after that, I had to go to Lund to do my show as a one-off at the part of the Lund Comedy Festival in Sweden. So I was very, very nervous because I didn't know if I was going to be able to talk until the afternoon of the gig. I just literally didn't say anything for all of that time. And I had a bit in that show about film noir. If you've seen my video about film noir, that's where that came from. It was a spoof of, I don't even know if it's a spoof of film noir. And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to Sweden now, so I'd better I'd better write something which is about Scandinoirs, which obviously I'd watched a lot of. So I wrote that bit to perform once in front of a Swedish audience and then completely forgot about it for a year. And then I was casting around for ideas for videos, and I thought, oh, well, I'll do that 30-second bit, and I wrote more jokes for it, and I changed the ending. I think so I wrote more of it, but essentially it was an idea I had on a train in order to endear me to Swedish people, and it just stayed in the back of my mind until it came forwards. And yes, I tend to have a couple of ideas on the go, and either they come together or they don't. Obviously, some of the videos are going to be better than others, and I'm often you mentioned The Little Man Who Lives in the Crisps, which is one of my favorite videos, and it's the one that comedians like, because they're always like, "Oh, are you going to do more Little Man Who Lives in the Crisps?" And I have to sort of say, well, it wasn't my most successful video by a long way. It's just I like it a lot, but it doesn't really exactly have viral written all over it. It's just very weird. But The Little Man Who Lives in the Crisps, the little animated guy, I made him as a pitch for a web series that didn't go anywhere. Which I pitched through a production company. So I wanted to do a web series about looking for fairies. It didn't happen, but I still had him sitting on my hard drive. So I thought, well, I can't just not use this little guy I've made. What can I do? So essentially, I think what I'm doing there is I'm plagiarizing Limmy, probably, but using my animation techniques to cover up the fact that I'm plagiarizing Limmy.
He does come back, doesn't he? He's in.
He does reappear once or twice. Maybe he'll be back again.
I mean, now that you have become a viral sensation, obviously you continue to produce these videos. A mildly viral sensation. Do you does that affect your thinking? Like, you obviously have a funny idea on the train, but then do you think, that if I parody Star Trek, that's going to find a much bigger audience than if I parody how a 90s video RPG would work? Like, does that factor in at all? Or
it should more than it does. What I mean, I look at there's people who I know from the circuit who have gone properly internationally viral during this same period of time, like Nigel Ng's Uncle Roger videos are a global sensation. I don't know if you've seen them. His character is, I think, a Malaysian uncle who watches videos of people cooking and yells at them when they do it wrong. Now that that's big in Asia. Asia have no idea who I am. It's an entire continent. So having seen people who I've gigged with go, catastrophic sounds bad. Stratospherically, that's the word. I'm not criticizing Nigel, let's be clear. Go stratospherically big and be able to do like a world tour off the back of funny internet videos. Now that gives you a sort of sense of how high the headroom is for viral. But I don't regret not leaning into the same thing. People still say, when are you going to do another Scandinoir video? And it's like, well, what, do you want another less good one or not? Like, why would, I don't know. Whenever something goes well, like a couple of weeks ago, I did a spoof of edgy stand-up comedy, which got a bit more attention than my videos usually do. So I got a bit of a bump on the YouTube, which is also annoying because it means that people who don't share my exact opinions see it and then complain. But I'm not going to do the same thing. The week after, I want to do something, or whatever it is, 2 weeks after, I want to do something different. I want to not give you the same thing again because I just get bored, I think.
Just we've got another question for the audience, but I just wanted to ask something. You sort of alluded in your talk to what John Ronson refers to as the culture wars.
The culture wars. Yes, all the things we argue about on the internet.
That is a very good John Ronson.
Thank you. I don't know why he sounds like this. He's from Wales. That's not a Welsh accent. Where does your accent come from, Ron? I don't know.
But you exist on the internet in this space, and as you mentioned there, you did the edgy stand-up comedy video. It gets a lot of traction. We found, obviously, our podcast is microscopic compared, but we found that if we have it we did one that was like, is satire more left-wing or right-wing? Or we did one where we talked about the role of satire in the culture. Those episodes get a huge spike. So whereas in terms of your brand, that's not something I necessarily think of you. Is
No.
that something you're aware of?
Yeah, yes, in making that video, it's like, Jesus, I wish I hadn't expressed an opinion. Because like I had someone angrily unsubscribe with you don't think the comedians are having their free speech stolen from them? Well, let's see how you like being cancelled. And it's like, it's okay, because it was just you. Like, I can deal with being cancelled by one person. But yeah, I think it's unfortunate because I was a little bit snarky about conservative comedians. Obviously, there are conservative comedians like Jeff Norcott who have got, you know, as many jokes as you could possibly want from a comedian. You know, comedians with conservative politics who write jokes and go out and make people laugh. And there is little resentment on the circuit. You know, there's little antipathy towards conservative comedians who go out and tell jokes. But there is an alternative route, and I don't think it only applies to conservatives, which is to use controversy as a sort of lever, you know, to get a foot in the door through controversy. And sometimes it happens naturally, and sometimes I think it's quite frequently manufactured. And I'm probably rambling now, but what I'm trying to say is that I wouldn't. I don't seek to court that. You know, I want to express my opinions, and the truth is, of course, you know, as I have more followers on Twitter now, I am a little bit more cautious about what I say. Not because I'm afraid of being cancelled by the authoritarian left, but because I don't want to get into a row with people whose followers include actual members of the far right, even though when pressed they claim that they don't create their controversial alt-right comedy to appeal to the far right. I don't want to get into those fights. And the other thing is, I do have the security blanket of being a middle-class white guy, which means that the comments I get on my YouTube, when I compare them to colleagues with a similar following who don't fit into that category, are very different in tone. It's very rare that I get, not completely unheard of, that I get sexually suggestive comments, but it's just one guy, and actually he seems fine.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I'll stop.
I take it as a compliment, but it's a very different experience. So that was a very vague, rambling.
Oh, that's good.
It did include quite a good John Ronson impersonation. So
yes, and we've got applause for that in the Q&A. So I'm going to go to for the John Ronson in particular. I'm going to go to the next question from the audience, which is, I'm really interested to hear the answer to this as well. Which comedians are the biggest influences on your sense of humour?
Well, my fear is that that's patently obvious from watching me do stand-up. So I'm always pleased when people ask that, because it suggests that they can't immediately tell. Although some reviewers have been quite scathing on that front. Pretty certain Chortle said something like, what if Bill Bailey couldn't play any instruments? Which is like, yeah, that's pretty much what I'm trying to do, I suppose. I'd rather it weren't that obvious, but yeah, huge fan of Bill Bailey. But not only Bill Bailey. I think if you're my age, I think it's hard not to have, and you're into comedy, it's hard not to have been overly influenced by Eddie Izzard, because she was just the most, for a few years, the best comedian in the world, I think. Like astonishingly good and hugely influential. I hope that doesn't sound like a backhanded compliment. I mean, what an incredible run of shows, and an incredible way of delivering what's essentially observational comedy in a completely unique style, hugely far too influential on me and many others. But you know, lots of other people. You know, Josie Long, I'm always hugely in admiration of, and Maria Bamford, who I discovered many years ago now, but still came to later. I found her. I don't think it's online anymore. It was called the Maria Bamford Show, like a web series filmed on a crappy camcorder. It's it's mostly the same material that went into her Unwanted Thoughts comedy album. So it's a lot of stuff about her having essentially a breakdown and having to go back to live with her parents in Duluth, which sounds like it wouldn't be funny, but it's really, really good. It was absolutely, and in a weird way, maybe because the American circuit is so big, it's weird to think that something as weird as Maria Bamford is still on the peripheries of mainstream comedy. And that's I'm always concerned about being too conservative and being too motivated by fear, which is why I focused on that in what I was talking about. So I have huge admiration for people who do things that would make me afraid.
And another question for the audience here is, are you sometimes surprised by what things take off? I'm thinking of your recent Queen's Light Duties tweet, which was referenced all over the place. Did you anticipate that? Very good John Ronson impression, by the way.
Thank you. Well, yeah. Maybe I should do a John Ronson video. If enough people know what he sounds like. I thought it was just me. Yeah, I wasn't aware that tweet. Yeah, that tweet definitely did better than I was expecting. Obviously, I just dashed that off. It's one of the cheats of having over, once you have over a few tens of thousands of Twitter followers. Not that I have loads, but I have a few tens of thousands. Those kind of little silly throwaway jokes, you've got a chance. Whereas if you have 3,000 Twitter followers, they tend not to pick up. So you get a bit of a I don't know, follower privilege. I don't know what you'd call it. Just you have a chance that a very silly joke will catch people. Which if you have a smaller follower count, you don't. So you don't have to. Yeah, that obviously quite transparently isn't something that I had slaved over and crafted. All I did was deliberately misunderstand the phrasing of a newspaper headline. What an original premise for comedy. It couldn't be simpler. I dashed it off, and if I didn't realize it had gone that far, but obviously people saw it. But you know that absolutely, there's no way of guessing which bits are going to really work. The Star Trek video was at the time, one of my most successful videos. A 27-year-old television show, hardly topical. And I was not very happy with it when I uploaded it. And I thought this one's going to be a duffer, and it went really well. So no, there isn't a way of. I mean, part of the reason I was so down on it was that I'd spent the entire week doing a CGI bald head, so it had taken a lot of work. But no, and that's one reason to not try and be too strategic, because you can't account for the randomness of what people are going to see, share, laugh at.
Yeah, I mean, it seems from our conversation this afternoon, you were surprised that people got the John Ronson reference. So maybe the next one should be every single time John Ronson says culture.
Culture. Yeah. Every single John Ronson documentary. Yeah, I might do that.
Yeah.
I can't do Louis Theroux, so I might as well do John Ronson.
I did actually use that Star Trek video in my teaching this year on the module called. I know.
What did it teach?
Well, the module was about satire and literature, and I was trying to explain the difference between Horatian and Juvenalian satire.
Naturally, yes.
So I said,
I don't know what those mean. You have to explain that to me.
Well, I know this isn't what the seminar's about, but Juvenalian satire is like really brutal. If you want to completely destroy someone, Horatian is kind of jovial, friendly banter, I suppose.
Gentle
mocking.
Bants between mates, just bants. Yeah, just bants, classic bants. With her
exactly. So it's like Alistair isn't trying to destroy Star Trek Next Generation, but he is.
You tell that to the people who got really upset with me in the comments, who think that I have made that minutely observed video about that series because I hate Star Trek and don't think it's good. People are shockingly I sort of touched upon people worrying about offense in comedy. The truth is, it's very hard. If people see things, someone's going to get offended about it. People aren't going to get upset. I don't think I don't think we have a crisis of people being offended. What we have is a crisis of people being able to see your jokes, people being able to hear your jokes. Because if you're just telling jokes to your friends, then everybody understands the context. We have a crisis of decontextualization sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think I have to resist the temptation to sarcastically respond to those people, because they're entitled to like Star Trek. I like Star Trek. It's not their fault that they have misunderstood the context of my obviously loving homage to Star Trek. The joke is about Star Trek's aspiration to depict a progressive world, and of course, inevitably, as we all do, falling short of its aspirations by being written by a bunch of mostly guys with sexist attitudes that haven't really been examined very well, or failing to deal with race in anything other than really heavy-handed metaphors.
Yeah. So I'm sure you're aware that this time last year you were featured in a Guardian article asking, has lockdown changed comedy forever? And it started by saying the popularity of internet comics has ballooned in the past year, which would have been 2020. Talent agents are taking notice, but will viral lols translate to a long-term career? So how are you planning to translate your viral lols into a long-term career?
Well, I've invested those lols offshore. It's really we haven't quite finished the pandemic. I'm sure you're aware, and my gigging schedule is beginning to return to normal. I'm doing regular weekend slots again, which have been very, very sparse over the last couple of years. So I'm going back to the Edinburgh Fringe for the first time since 2019 this year, which, if you know anything about comedy, you'll be aware is the central the slaughterhouse to which all of the comedic cattle are channeled, and occasionally one of them escapes and gets on telly. And it's interesting because that's when I'll find out, does picking up followers on YouTube, does having 3 subscribers from Uruguay actually make a difference when it comes to building a career, to selling tickets on a rainy Wednesday in Edinburgh? We don't yet know. We'll find out.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens with the viral lols when they're Edinburgh lols then, and best of luck with that. And
thank you.
Just as a kind of final question, what's the single best piece of advice that anyone's given you related to your career? What would you advise someone else to do? And what piece of advice would you give someone else?
You warned me you might ask that question, and I didn't think about it.
Fair enough.
But in a weird way, I didn't touch upon it in my talk, and I probably should have. In a weird way, when I was at the London Film School, is very focused on social realism. A lot of the tutors come out of a social realist tradition. When I was there, Mike Lee was the chair, so that gives you a sense of the tone of things at the school. And while they weren't too didactic about it, there was a general sense that sci-fi and fantasy were innately bad forms, and that real film was about doing real drama about real people and real things. I don't agree with that. I strongly disagree with the narrowness of that, even though social realism is in itself a perfectly viable medium. And I had quite a combative time there, and I have no regrets about going to London Film School. I learned a huge amount, and I gained an awful lot from the relationships I built and the experience I built there. But I did get a sense of people saying, "Get out of our medium. We don't want you making films." I remember the head of the film school, who I have much respect for, flippantly saying, you could do anything, Alistair. You could become the world's first pre-Raphaelite stand-up comedian. And this is before I had started doing any comedy. And in a weird way, I did his joke. I think in a weird way, I sort of slightly resentfully did that. I remember delivering my graduation film to the film school, and at the London Film School, what they did was they would screen the films, and then the crew would come and sit up on the stage, and without being allowed to speak, be given feedback from all of the lecturers in the in the school, which is a little bit like the dying on stage I was describing, because if they didn't like it, then you've got to sit there in front of everyone for about 20 minutes while they explain how much they didn't like your film. And spoiler, they did not like my graduation film. It went on to be nominated for a student Oscar, so it wasn't that bad, but that was an awful experience. And I did my first gig as a stand-up in that week, but purely by coincidence. And it went well, by the standards of an open mic gig. People laughed. And I've had those things not happened at the same time, maybe I wouldn't have pursued stand-up as doggedly. I mean, doggedly, it took me years to get anything going. But I think the fact that, like I say, my films weren't being recognized as belonging in, I would see my films screened alongside other people's films and they didn't fit in. Whereas as soon as I started doing stand-up, whatever I was talking about, it fit in with stand-up. And so in a weird way, that little jibe, a joke he made, was probably the piece of advice which has had the most influence. However, that didn't happen at York St. John, because everyone there was really encouraging and nice.
That does remind me, I sometimes start new modules by saying, first year modules by saying, hello, what's your name and why did you want to come to university to study literature in our case? And someone once said, revenge.
That is the best reason to do anything. That's a great answer.
Yeah.
So it's revenge, resilience, optimism, and keep the faith, I guess.
Yeah. So I hope you'll accept that I've slightly cheated on the answer to that question.
That's fine.
No, that's a very fine message to draw to a close on, because we've come to time. So thank you ever so much for spending the afternoon with us, and thank you to everyone who came.
Thank you.
Yeah. And
okay.
Yeah. That's it. So
sorry. Thank you so much, Alistair. That's been a fascinating and funny and just really lovely way to spend the afternoon. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
There. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.